It's pretty crazy how the human brain is just this highly dangerous efficiency machine.
Right. Dangerous is definitely the word for it, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, if you walk past a broken door handle in your office or like your home every single day, by day 3, your brain just completely stops registering it as a problem.
It just totally erases the frictions.
Exactly. You stop seeing it. You just accept it as, the reality of your environment. You automatically jiggle the handle a certain way, or you pull a little to the left and you open the door without consciously thinking about it at all.
You've completely adapted to the dysfunction.
Right. And today, we are analyzing a framework designed to basically forcibly strip away that blindness.
And it is a critical unlearning process, because when we look at traditional models of education or even standard corporate training, the system heavily relies on these predefined paths.
Oh, absolutely.
You're handed a worksheet or like a project brief where the problem has already been perfectly defined for you by someone else.
Yeah, somebody already did the hard part.
Exactly. Your only mandate is to retrieve a memorized formula, apply it to that predefined problem, and produce this singular, measurable, correct answer. That model breeds adaptation to dysfunction because it literally never asks you to locate the problem yourself.
Okay, let's unpack this because that is the core mission for our deep dive today.
Right.
We are exploring the foundational documents behind a really highly structured learning journey known as the Ideathon and Hackathon framework, or I and H.
Right.
The source material outlines this pedagogical philosophy designed to empower students to become genuine, real-world problem solvers. But, and this is key, the implications of this methodology stretch way, way beyond a middle school or high school classroom.
Without a doubt.
Like if you are managing a team, designing a product, or just trying to navigate the complexities of your own life, the mechanics of how this framework constructs an innovation mindset, it's going to seriously challenge your default behaviors.
What's fascinating here is the most disruptive element of the framework is introduced immediately in the text, right at the top.
Yeah, it doesn't hold back.
It explicitly prevents students from jumping to a solution.
Wait, really? Just a hard stop.
A hard stop. In a culture plagued by what we can call solutionism, which is, the compulsive drive to fix a point of friction, the absolute second it is felt, this forced pause is radical.
Solutionism, that is a great word for it.
Yeah, and solutionism is why we see so many wasted resources in both the public and private sectors, honestly. We build an app for a problem that really just required a conversation.
I see that solutionism constantly in the corporate world.
Everywhere.
Think about a manager who notices a sudden drop in team productivity. The immediate solutionist reflex is to just implement a new piece of time tracking software.
Right. They jump straight to the fix.
Exactly. But they never stopped to investigate the underlying friction. Was the drop in productivity caused by burnout? Was there a bottleneck in the communication pipeline? Were the project goals unclear?
They don't know because they didn't ask.
Right. If you don't do the investigation, you end up treating a symptom. You're basically putting a highly expensive administrative Band-Aid on a structural fracture.
And often, that Band-Aid creates secondary problems that are way worse than the initial symptom.
Oh, like the software annoying everyone.
Yes. The new time tracking software tanks team morale, which increases the burnout, which drops productivity even further. By intentionally delaying the solution phase, the I and H framework short-circuits that entire reflex. It forces the individual to dwell in the intense discomfort of an unresolved issue.
That sounds incredibly frustrating, but necessary.
It treats problem-solving as a deliberate multi-stage discipline, where you literally have to earn the right to propose a solution.
So, unlearning that habituation to dysfunction, it doesn't happen by just staring harder at a wall, though. It requires a structured entry point.
Right, there has to be a method.
And the framework calls this initial phase problem ki Khoj, which essentially translates to finding the right problem.
Yes, stage 01. And the methodology for finding the right problem is entirely grounded in the immediate physical world of the student.
Okay, what does that look like practically?
They are instructed to observe their surroundings, reflect on their daily mundane experiences, and identify meaningful challenges within their school, their home, or their local community. It requires an active dehabituation to their environment.
Okay, I have to challenge the mechanics of how this is actually achieved in a classroom setting, though.
Sure, go for it.
When I review the list of skills the source claims are developed in this first stage, one of the primary pillars is curiosity.
Right.
Now, looking at how deeply ingrained our habituation to friction is curiosity actually something you can teach an adolescent? I mean, toddlers are endlessly curious, right? They ask why 100 times a day.
Sometimes 1,000.
Right. But by the time a student is 12 or 15, that instinct is often completely dormant. Are we just hoping they miraculously tap into an innate trait? Or is there an actual mechanism here?
It's a valid skepticism, definitely, especially if we view curiosity purely as a spontaneous emotion.
Which is how most people view it, I think.
Exactly. But the framework treats curiosity not as an emotion, but as a disciplined cognitive practice. It is a muscle that has atrophied and requires, like, targeted physical therapy.
Okay, I like that analogy. So how do we flex it?
The sequence of skills listed in the source provides the roadmap, really. It goes observation, curiosity, inquiry, reflection, and problem identification.
So it starts with observation.
It begins with observation, which is very distinct from just looking. Observation is the deliberate act of cataloging the environment.
Give me an example of that.
Okay, say a student is forced to document the exact flow of foot traffic in a crowded cafeteria. The raw data they collect literally forces the curiosity. They start wondering, why does everyone crowd around one specific table? Why is this hallway always jammed while the other is empty?
So the observation acts as a trigger. The data reveals anomalies that the habituated brain was just ignoring.
Exactly. The curiosity leads to inquiry, which is asking direct questions about those specific anomalies. Then comes reflection, which is the internal processing of the answers they find. And finally, problem identification. The curiosity is essentially reverse engineered through mandatory observation.
Wow, so you're not telling them to be curious. You're giving them a task that makes curiosity inevitable.
Precisely. You build the structure, and the curiosity naturally follows.
There is a heavy emphasis in the source material on grounding these identified problems in a local context. And I kept thinking, why is that restriction necessary?
You think it limits them?
Yeah, if we are trying to build future-ready innovators, why not assign them the most pressing global challenges right out of the gate? Like, why not ask them to solve global supply chain logistics or climate change?
Because scale causes paralysis.
Paralysis.
Completely. If you hand a teenager the concept of global climate change, the sheer magnitude of the variables makes it an impossible abstraction. They cannot observe it directly. They can only regurgitate information they've consumed from secondary sources.
So they just parrot back whatever they heard on the news.
Right, and they'll likely propose a generic, sweeping solution that lacks any practical engineering. Like, we should ban all cars.
Right, which isn't a functional solution.
Not at all. However, if you restrict their scope to their local context, the abstract becomes highly tangible.
Okay, so it's the difference between asking them to fix global warming versus asking them to figure out why the water runoff from the school roof is flooding the local community garden every Tuesday.
Precisely that. The local context gives them agency.
They can actually touch it.
Yes, they can physically walk over to the flooded garden. They can measure the angle of the roof. They can speak to the groundskeeper.
That makes a lot of sense.
And in the corporate world, this is akin to proper project scoping. If a consultancy tries to just, quote-unquote, fix the company culture as a monolith, they fail.
Oh, 100%. It's too vague.
But if they look at the specific friction in the quarterly review process for the sales team, they can actually engineer a measurable intervention. The local context scales the world down to a size where the individual can actually exert leverage.
A leverage, that's the key. Now, the text also dictates that in this initial stage, students must learn to ask meaningful questions.
Right, a crucial skill.
That phrasing caught my attention because it sort of implies there are meaningless questions, or at least superficial ones. In the context of the flooded garden, what separates a superficial question from a meaningful one?
Well, a superficial question usually accepts the fundamental premise of the problem without challenging the underlying architecture. It is often binary.
Like what?
A superficial question would be, how do we build a bigger bucket to catch the water from the roof?
Oh, I see. It just accepts the water is falling there.
Exactly. It assumes the water must fall exactly where it is currently falling, and the only variable to change is the size of the receptacle.
Whereas a meaningful question challenges the structural assumptions.
Yes. A meaningful question asks, why is the roof angled toward the garden in the first place? What is the original architectural intent of this drainage system? Or even, is the soil composition of the garden artificially compacted, preventing natural absorption?
It digs deeper.
Right. A meaningful question digs under the symptom to locate the structural flaw. It creates a thinker who refuses to accept the default parameters of their environment.
Okay, so the student spots the structural anomaly. They have dehabituated their brain, they have looked closely at the flooded garden, and they have identified a tangible local point of friction.
Stage 1 is complete.
The immediate, almost physical urge for an ambitious student is going to be to state a hypothesis and immediately start building a fix.
The solutionism rears its head again.
Exactly. But the framework throws up a hard stop. It forces them to transition into stage 02, which is problem ki samaj. And that translates to deeply understanding the problem.
Right. Because guessing the cause of a friction point is easy. Everybody guesses. Validating that guess with external reality is rigorous work.
Here's where it gets really interesting, at least for me. When I analyzed the mechanics of this second stage, it immediately reminded me of a diagnostic medical process.
Oh, that's a brilliant comparison.
Right, because if you go to a physician with a severe migraine, the headache is just the surface symptom. If the doctor simply hands you a painkiller and sends you home, they are engaging in solutionism.
They haven't solved anything.
Exactly, they have just masked the friction. A good diagnostician doesn't guess. They run blood panels. They check your blood pressure. They order an MRI. They are actively collecting evidence to locate the neurological or vascular root cause.
And the INH framework is essentially demanding that students act as diagnosticians of their own environment.
Yes.
The methodology for this stage is incredibly stringent. It requires interacting with users, collecting evidence, conducting formal interviews, and deploying surveys. The student is actively prohibited from relying on their own internal assumptions.
They can't just trust their gut?
No, they have to externalize their thought process.
I have to pause here because we need to be realistic about the demographic we are discussing. We're asking middle and high school students to perform unbiased root cause analysis.
It's a tall order.
Do they generally possess the emotional maturity to separate their own assumptions from the evidence they collect? Like, can you actually formalize empathy in a teenager? Or is there a huge risk that they just conduct interviews that suffer from intense confirmation bias, where they only hear what they want to hear?
Confirmation bias is a massive risk.
Mm-hmm.
But, to be fair, not just for teenagers, but for seasoned executives.
Fair point. Fair point.
We see companies launch products all the time that nobody wants because the market research was designed to validate the CEO's existing assumption rather than actually interrogate it.
The classic echo chamber.
Exactly. What the framework does to combat this is turn empathy into a formalized, structural methodology rather than just a vague emotional state.
How so? How do you formalize empathy?
By requiring a mixed methods approach to data collection.
Meaning what exactly?
Well, if a student simply has an unstructured conversation with the groundskeeper about the flooded garden, they might just walk away thinking, the groundskeeper is annoyed by the rain.
Which isn't super helpful.
Right. But the framework requires them to synthesize interview data with empirical surveys and environmental evidence. When the student is forced to write out the interview questions in advance and then cross-reference those answers with, say, historical weather data or soil drainage rates, it creates a system of checks and balances.
Oh, so they can't just rely on the vibe of the conversation.
Exactly. The structure forces the objectivity that the student might lack internally. It teaches them that empathy isn't just feeling sorry for someone.
Right.
It is the rigorous analytical process of understanding a user's exact operational reality.
That distinction is vital. Empathy as an analytical tool, not just an emotional reflex.
This raises an important question, though, about the tools they use to do this.
Yes, and that brings up one of the most fascinating and, frankly, most modern aspects of the source material. Embedded directly in this second stage, alongside empathy and root cause analysis, the framework introduces responsible AI literacy.
Which is huge.
It dictates that students must learn to use AI responsibly to support their research while critically applying human judgment.
It is a profound inclusion. It acknowledges the technological reality of the current era rather than trying to ban it from the classroom like so many places are trying to do.
Right. Pretending it doesn't exist isn't going to work.
Exactly. But it places AI very deliberately within the workflow.
It feels like a delicate tightrope, though. On one side, you have this staggering technological tool that can synthesize millions of data points in seconds. On the other side, the framework is desperately trying to teach deep, human-centric empathy.
They seem opposed.
Yeah. How do those two concepts actually integrate in practice? It seems like relying on an AI might distance the student from the human element of the problem.
It only distances the student if the AI is used as a substitute for judgment rather than a lever for research.
Ah, okay. Elaborate on that.
The framework draws a hard line between quantitative synthesis and qualitative meaning. Let's return to the flooded garden. The student can use an AI to instantly process a decade's worth of municipal rainfall reports.
Which would take a human hours, if not days.
Right. The AI can summarize technical documents on urban drainage velocity. It accelerates the data gathering phase immensely.
So the AI handles the heavy lifting of the quantitative landscape.
Exactly. But the framework mandates the critical application of human judgment because an AI cannot perform the qualitative, empathetic synthesis.
It can't read the room.
No. An AI cannot understand the physical toll it takes on an elderly community member to navigate around the mud caused by the flood. An AI cannot sit in the garden, observe the body language of the groundskeeper, and realize that the flooding isn't just an agricultural problem, but a source of deep personal frustration and, wasted labor.
So they work in tandem.
Yes. The AI provides the statistical landscape, and the human provides the emotional and operational context.
But that actually mirrors a major crisis in the corporate tech world right now.
Does it?
Yeah, we see companies deploying AI to handle customer service or to analyze market trends, and they let the AI generate the final strategy. But the output is incredibly sterile. It totally lacks the nuance of human friction.
Because it's missing the empathy.
Exactly. The companies that are actually succeeding are the ones using AI to gather the data, but relying on human product managers to apply the empathy and make the final judgment call on the design. This framework is essentially training students in that exact hybrid workflow.
And the culmination of this hybrid workflow, combining AI-supported data with human-centric empathy, is the creation of a clear, validated problem statement. By the end of stage 02, the student has stripped away their initial assumptions.
They've done the work.
They have gathered empirical evidence. They have mapped the user's emotional and operational reality. They have isolated the infection, to use your diagnostic analogy from earlier.
They have earned the right to write the prescription.
They have.
Yeah.
Which transitions the journey into stage 03, problem ka Samadhan, which means designing and improving solutions.
So what does this all mean? We have the validated root cause. We've done the deep empathy work. But empathy alone doesn't build a functional drainage system,
No, it doesn't.
Empathy doesn't write code or construct a physical prototype. How does the framework bridge the gap between human understanding and actual physical engineering?
It bridges that gap through a highly structured, iterative workflow. It's not just brainstorming. It's brainstorming creative ideas, evaluating those ideas against the evidence gathered, building prototypes, testing those prototypes with the actual users, gathering feedback, and then looping back to improve the design.
Okay, when I look at the specific skills developed in this third stage, there is a term that feels slightly incongruous with the rest of the text.
What's that?
The source lists computational thinking as a core requirement here. And when I read that, my immediate assumption is that the framework suddenly pivots into like a coding boot camp. Ah, I see why you'd think that.
Right. Does this imply that to solve a local community problem, every single student needs to become a software engineer?
That is a very common conflation, actually. But computational thinking is not synonymous with writing code.
It's not.
Not at all. Coding is merely one specific language used to execute computational thought. Computational thinking, as a broader cognitive framework, is the ability to look at a massive, complex, disorganized problem and break it down into a sequence of smaller, manageable, highly logical components.
So it's more about the architecture of logic than the syntax of a programming language.
Precisely. It involves 4 key pillars, usually: decomposition, pattern recognition, abstraction, and algorithmic design. Think of it like writing an incredibly precise recipe.
Okay, I like food analogies. Walk me through it.
If you want to bake a complex pastry, you don't just throw all the ingredients in a bowl and apply heat.
That would be a disaster. Right. You decompose the process. You recognize the patterns of how yeast reacts to temperature. You abstract away the unnecessary details, like it doesn't matter what color the mixing bowl is.
Yeah.
And finally, you write the algorithm. Step 1, proof the yeast. Step 2, mix the dry ingredients. Step 3, incorporate the butter. The output of one specific step becomes the mandatory input of the next.
That makes perfect sense. So if a student is trying to redesign the physical traffic flow of the school drop-off zone, they apply computational thinking.
Yes, exactly.
They break the physical space down into a logical sequence of movements. They design an algorithm for the cars. If a car enters lane A, it must proceed to zone B before stopping. They are applying the rigorous logic of computer science to the messy reality of physical human movement.
And that rigorous logic is what ensures their brainstorm solutions are actually viable. Once they have a logically sound concept, they must build a prototype. They have to make the idea tangible.
They have to physically build it.
Yes. Then they take that prototype and put it back into the hands of the users they interviewed in stage 02. And this is where we encounter perhaps the most transformative psychological element of the entire I and H framework.
Which is?
The explicit focus on iteration and resilience.
Yeah. This requires us to really examine how our traditional systems handle the concept of failure, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because in the linear, almost assembly line model of education, failure is a dead end. If you take a standardized test and select the wrong answer, you receive an F.
Game over.
Exactly. The system penalizes you, records the failure, and moves on to the next chapter. The psychological conditioning there is intense. You are taught that failure is a reflection of your inherent intelligence, and that making a mistake is to be avoided at all costs.
Which breeds catastrophic perfectionism and anxiety.
Yes.
It creates adults who are terrified of taking risks or proposing novel ideas in the workplace because they have been conditioned to believe that if a project isn't flawless on the very first attempt, it is a permanent mark against their competence.
How does the framework dismantle that conditioning? It's so baked in.
By embedding prototyping and user feedback as mandatory steps, the framework completely reframes the definition of failure.
Give me a practical example of that.
Okay, let's assume our student builds a prototype for a new drainage trench for the garden. They dig a small version of it, they test it with a bucket of water, and it completely fails. The water overflows and the mud slides back in.
A total mess.
Right. In a traditional classroom, that is a failed project, a bad grade.
You failed the trench test.
Exactly. But within the I and H methodology, that physical failure is not a judgment on the student's worth. It is essential, highly valuable data.
Right. Because you cannot definitively know what works until you prove what doesn't.
Exactly. The failure of the prototype reveals the flaws in the hypothesis. The trench was too shallow, or the angle was incorrect. Armed with that new, hard data, the student iterates.
They try again.
They redesign the trench and build a second prototype. This cycle builds profound psychological resilience. It teaches the brain that a setback is simply a necessary mechanism in the engineering process. It completely neutralizes the emotional sting of making a mistake.
It turns a mistake from a roadblock into a stepping stone.
Well said.
And if we look at the sheer synthesis of skills required to execute this final stage, it is staggering.
It's a lot.
The text lists creativity, computational thinking, design thinking, prototyping, collaboration, communication, and iteration. These students are not just building a widget in isolation.
No, it's highly social.
Right. They have to debate the logic with their team. They have to communicate their vision to the end user. They have to swallow their ego when the user looks at their prototype and says, actually, this is really confusing to use.
They are essentially running a micro startup within the confines of their school.
That's exactly what it sounds like.
They are navigating the exact same interpersonal frictions, technical hurdles, and market feedback loops that product teams at major tech companies face daily. But they're doing it in a structured environment, driven by a purpose they identify themselves within their own community.
Okay, stepping back from the granular mechanics of these three stages, from the initial observation in Khoj to the validated empathy in Samaj to the resilient iteration in Samadhan, we can start to see the holistic architecture of what the source document calls future-ready innovators.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the term future-ready is used so often it borders on a buzzword. Honestly.
Oh, it's thrown around everywhere.
But we need to define it rigorously in the context of our current economic and technological trajectory. We are rapidly transitioning into a reality where generative artificial intelligence, robotics, and complex automation are fundamentally restructuring the labor market.
Right. Any task that relies on rote memorization, standardized data retrieval, or simple repetitive logical sequencing is going to be automated. It is already happening.
Which is why the specific stack of skills cultivated by this framework is so incredibly critical. This methodology constructs a human intellect that is uniquely insulated from automation.
Insulated from automation. That's a powerful thought.
Let's analyze what an AI system excels at. It is unparalleled at generating generic solutions based on historical data. It can synthesize massive data sets to find statistical averages.
But look at what the AI is physically and fundamentally incapable of doing. We touched on this during the empathy stage, but it applies to the entire journey.
Right.
An AI cannot stand on a street corner in a specific neighborhood and notice the invisible friction of a poorly designed crosswalk. It lacks the biological, human curiosity required to observe erratic human behavior and ask, why are those people ignoring the crosswalk and running across the street?
Exactly. And an AI cannot build trust. It cannot sit in a circle of folding chairs in a community center, listen to the nuanced, emotionally charged frustrations of a marginalized group, and understand the deep cultural context behind those frustrations.
It just processes text.
Right. It can transcribe the words, but it cannot feel the weight of them.
And it absolutely cannot resiliently iterate a physical prototype based on subtle human feedback. Like, an AI cannot watch a user physically struggle to grip a prototype tool, notice their hand cramping, and realize, oh, I need to carve away a 1/4 inch of this plastic to accommodate human ergonomics.
It doesn't have a body to understand ergonomics.
Exactly. The entire Ideathon and Hackathon framework is maniacally focused on cultivating deeply human skills. Hyperlocal observation, emotional empathy, physical iteration, and psychological resilience.
It creates a beautiful synergy between human intuition and technological leverage.
Synergy is a great word for it.
The student learns to wield the technology, the computational thinking, the AI data synthesis as an amplifier for their human capabilities, not as a replacement for their own intellect.
They're the driver, not the passenger.
Yes. The machine executes the heavy lifting of data processing, while the human executes the heavy lifting of meaning-woking and empathetic design.
I am just marveling at the elegance of how this 3-stage structure balances the dualities of problem solving. In the corporate world, we constantly debate the value of, soft skills versus hard skills.
Always a debate.
But in stages 1 and 2 of this framework, the student is entirely focused on the soft, human-centric skills: curiosity, active listening, empathy, and collaboration. But then in stage 3, they must seamlessly integrate the hard analytical skills: computational thinking, root cause analysis, structural design, and physical prototyping. It demands that the individual become both a poet and an engineer.
The poet and the engineer.
And must possess the poet's sensitivity to understand the human suffering caused by a problem, and the engineer's cold logic to architect a functional solution to alleviate it.
When an individual, whether they're 14 years old or 40, honestly realizes they possess the capacity for both, their entire relationship with reality shifts.
It has to.
They transition from being passive consumers who merely tolerate a broken environment into active designers who believe they actually have the agency to reshape it.
Which brings us to a moment of synthesis for you, the listener. If you are going to extract the core operating principles from this Ideathon and Hackathon methodology and apply them to your own life, it requires internalizing this specific journey.
You have to walk the path.
Exactly. First, you must aggressively resist your own solutionism. Force yourself to dwell in the discomfort of an unsolved problem. Second, you must practice problem key Khoj, actively dehabituating your brain to spot the invisible frictions in your immediate environment.
Don't just walk past the broken door handle.
Exactly. Third, wade into the muddy waters of problem key Samaj. Put aside your ego to act as a diagnostician, using empirical evidence and deep empathy to locate the true root cause, while leveraging tools like AI for data, not judgment.
AI for data, human for judgment.
Always. And finally, problem ka Samadhan, deploying computational logic to build tangible prototypes, and reframing your inevitable failures as essential data for resilient iteration.
It really is a comprehensive blueprint for tackling ambiguity. And the mechanics of this blueprint are entirely agnostic to the scale of the problem.
Scale doesn't matter.
No, because the exact same sequence of observation, empathy, and iteration used to fix a flooded garden is the exact sequence required to restructure a failing corporate division or launch a disruptive startup.
And that leads me to a final provocation, something I really want you to seriously mull over as you go about your week. Throughout this deep dive, we have discussed students applying this methodology to highly localized, manageable frictions. A broken door, a flooded garden, a disorganized cafeteria.
Small-scale issues.
Right. But what happens when this methodology scales?
That is the ultimate variable in this equation, isn't it?
It is, because if we successfully deploy frameworks like this at scale, we are training an entire generation of students to systematically question the foundational architecture of their environment.
We are teaching them to refuse to accept the status quo.
Exactly. To dig past the superficial symptoms, to expose systemic root causes, and to view our current flawed realities merely as early-stage prototypes that are in desperate need of iteration. What happens when that generation reaches adulthood?
Oh, man.
What happens when they turn that precise, empathetic, and relentlessly analytical lens onto the macro structures of our society?
It's a huge question. Our current institutions, the legacy educational systems, the rigid corporate hierarchies, the political machinations, are they actually prepared to absorb a generation that fundamentally refuses to adapt to dysfunction?
I highly doubt it.
A generation that won't merely complain about institutional friction, but will confidently demand the agency to tear down the prototype and engineer a better system.
It is a thrilling, and perhaps for those invested in the status quo, a deeply terrifying prospect. But it is undeniably the exact paradigm shift required to navigate the complexities of the future. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of innovation. We challenge you to take this framework, find a piece of fiction in your own world, and start investigating. Be the poet, be the engineer, and never be afraid to build a prototype. Until next time, keep digging deeper.